Bye-bye.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, we're wrapping up.
All right.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Happy to see everybody back in the webinar. I really look forward to these each week. I miss this whole interaction, even though my audience is not live. I miss the interaction with students and fellow chefs. I thought this week, I mentioned last week after last webinar, and I'm hoping that some of our students in particular, and some of my colleagues are trying some of the things that we're doing here while we have some time and we're at home to experiment with some different things. I had something happen about a week and a half ago that was really positive and made me feel really good. One of my former students, Luis Rivera, a student of mine from Cologne, New York, back 5-7 years ago, sent me an email of gratitude. And as an educator, you know, and for my colleague educators out there, it's always great to get an email of gratitude. That's what we do, what we do for, right? But he also sent me a gift to commemorate the launch of his business, Father and Son's Kitchens, a Bronx-based business, and he sent me a couple of bottles of his barbecue sauce, which is quite delicious, actually. And I'm familiar with this product, and the backstory with the product is that when Louis was a student on our program, he attended one of my seminars, kind of an extracurricular activity that they did on canning and preserving, making jams and jellies and barbecue sauces, and particularly items for the specialty food business. So I received this in the mail, and immediately that night my family and I tried it. We really were very impressed with it. I want you to check him out and support his business, Father and Son's Kitchen.
I'll grab it right here real close.
Okay, thanks, Jake.
I see Lewis is also in the chat as well.
Excellent. Lewis is in our chat. Hello, Lewis. And this was something that had happened once before, actually a few times before in my career, with a very similar demo in talking about stuff from the specialty food business. I've done different things on canning and preserving and such. And back in the early 90s when I first started teaching, another one of my students, Eddie McCarthy, attended one of my workshops on canning and preserving, and he launched a business, and he's still, and this is his livelihood now, Hoboken Eddie's is the company name. He launched this, I believe, in the mid-90s, and he's still going strong, selling his product retail, commercially in places like ShopRite and things like that. Again, same concept. You know, we showed some basic techniques, which I'm going to show you today, and he was able to make a business out of that. I'm very proud of these two men for really seeing the dream and pursuing it. Every July, there's a specialty food show. Happens in New York City. Obviously, it's not going to happen this year, unfortunately. But at this show, if anyone's ever attended it, and if you haven't and you're in our industry, you really should make it your business to go. You'll see a wide variety of different products that are made for the specialty and gourmet market. So you'll see barbecue sauces, hot sauces, spice blends, flavored oils, pickles, etc. The whole gamut of things that you would buy in a gourmet operation. So I thought I would do some things today and kind of make it a little more accessible to the home cook, right? Summertime is coming. Things are starting to get lush and green, so we know the warm weather is coming. We had some beautiful days. Barbecuing season's happening. And we want to capture some flavors at this time of the year that we can use later on. We did a demo a couple of weeks ago on desserts, actually last week. And I talked about, the chocolate cake and some different combinations. One of the things I didn't mention was very often in the winter in my restaurant, I would serve peaches that were harvested locally, right? How do you do that in the middle of January? Well, you do that by learning how to preserve and pickle and things like that. So it's a very valuable skill because you can capture those flavors in a bottle. The first thing we're going to do today is show you something very basic, and that's a flavored oil, right? So if you think about it, it'd be great to have something that you can add to a dish, and one addition that brings in a whole bunch of different flavors. And that's what we're going to work on doing today with some different things. So we're going to start with our flavored oils today. And when I'm making a flavored oil, I want to, you might think immediately, well, let's use extra virgin olive oil, or let's use, the best olive oil we can find. Well, if you're going to be adding flavors to the oil, you want to make the flavors of the oil a little more neutral, right? So I am using olive oil. I use a ratio, and I'm going to be talking a lot about ratios today. in our pickling and our other things that we're doing. I'm using a ratio of equal parts pure olive oil, not extra virgin, right? Because I am going to heat this, right? And a sable oil here, canola oil, okay? Equal parts. Okay, and I'm going to warm this up to 100 degrees, right? So the reason why I'm not using extra virgin olive oil is extra virgin olive oil is cold pressed, and because it's cold pressed, we want to maintain the flavor of the olive. There's no heat added, right? In other additions of olive oil, pure olive oil, you know, and then going down to the lowest grades of olive oil like pumice olive oil, heat is added and the oils are extracted. So we don't want to use an extra virgin olive oil. We're heating the oil here because we want to infuse flavors into the oil so that when we add that oil to a dish, we get those wonderful flavors from the oil. So I'm starting here, again, equal parts canola oil and pure olive oil. Okay.
We already have a question from Curtis Brown, one of our regular viewers.
Yes, Curtis,
He said,
good morning.
And also I want to say good morning to everybody, saying good morning, Chef.
Good morning.
We appreciate that you're here. Curtis Brown asks, how many flavored oils have you made?
So my wife and I ran a farm business. I mentioned this in my in our first webinar several years ago, and we did a line of about 4 or 5 different oil blends, spice blends, barbecue sauces, preserves, etc. And then we had our restaurant. We used a lot of those products in our restaurant. For example, at the table, along with our bread, we would put a bottle of the flavored olive oil the guests could use, for their bread, and condiment. So I secured a couple of bottles here. Okay, these bottles came from Amazon, right? They cost out to be just about $1 per bottle. Okay, if you're costing that out. They can be reused as long as you sanitize them. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I have to make some decisions about what kind of flavors I want to get into these oils, right? I'm watching my temp here on the oil. I don't want this to exceed 110 degrees. I'm using a surface thermometer here. I'm just at 90 degrees right now, so I'm going to back this off because I don't want to heat this too much. When choosing flavors to put in, you want to go with items that have an oil content, right, rather than a water content. What I mean by that is choosing herbs, for example. There are certain herbs that work better in the flavored oil than others, right? For example, parsley, cilantro, chives, high water content herbs, right? You don't want that in the oil because that water is going to come out and it's going to discolor, the herbs are going to discolor. You want to go with things like thyme, rosemary, sage. I would even put lavenders, oreganos, marjorams in that category. I would stay away from the tarragons and the other stuff that has a high water content. Garlic, high oil content, excellent. Citrus rinds, excellent. And we're going to do 2 variations for you. I'm going to cut the fire on this oil now because I think we're at 105, which is perfect, right?
Is there a reason why you go directly to 100 and
yeah, we want to warm the oil because we're going to get a better extraction of flavor from these things that we're using in the bottles, right? So I'm going to start here. I have some fresh citrus rinds. I'm using orange and lemon, and we're going to go ahead and put these in the bottle. Okay, and as I'm putting these in the bottle, I'm actually squeezing and breaking them. That's releasing some of the oils. So that's going to be a very nice flavor profile for us, okay? When you just kind of twist that a little bit, feed that into the bottle, okay? Squeeze, that fragrance is so wonderful. If you've ever zested an orange or lemon, you know what that's like. And I have some lemon here. I could have put some lime in. I'm going to go with the orange and lemon here. I could have added some herbs to this as well. I'm just showing you a base, and I want your creativity and your flavor vocabulary, that's more important, to come through, right? So the first bottle is my citrus rind. That's my lemon and orange, okay? The other bottle I'm going to use here, I've washed this thyme very well, okay? This is fresh thyme. I'm going to squeeze, and you should do this whenever you're working with fresh herbs like this, particularly thyme, rosemary, because you want to break the leaves a little bit, release that oil, right? That's the aroma. That smells so wonderful, right? It comes right through. That's going to go into my bottle as well. Okay. And then I'm using some fresh garlic here, which I've peeled. I'm going to set that in the bottle. So now I have a thyme and garlic flavored oil. Okay. All right, and you can see we've set that up into our 2 bottles. Okay.
Genevieve Hernandez is back in the chat.
Genevieve, good morning, sweetheart. How are you?
She mentioned that she loves the oil that we use in the dining lab.
Yeah.
I think it is a garlic herb oil, or maybe just an herb oil.
Yes, right. So what we do in the dining lab, our dining lab restaurants, we actually take the herbs and blend them into the oil and then strain them out, which is also a nice way to do it. With that though, I'm looking for something visual, right? So I'm going to get a very similar flavor profile here, but I'm going to maintain the integrity of the visual. Imagine putting that on the table if you're serving a bread basket to a guest at a restaurant, and you're going to have them put a little bit of oil on their plate for their bread. So here we have again the oil we're going to now take. It's at 100. Stay nice and warm. I'm just going to check my temp again. And we're really working in the element now where there's a little bit of science involved, right? We're talking about ratios and ingredients and such. So we want to make sure that we understand that. So temperature control, measurements, very important, especially if you want to duplicate this, and especially if you're making this, right, for production. I used to make 60, 80 bottles at a time, right? So that was a lot of oil. We had to maintain the temperature. We had to pre-fill all the bottles, etc. So let's see what happens now as I pour this oil in. Okay? You can see the ingredients light up so nice. Okay? And I'm going to go right up to the neck of the bottle. I want to be consistent. Okay? And over the citrus as well. I'm particularly interested in this one. The nice thing about these oils is they don't need that much time to generate flavors. So if I did this in the morning, I'm ready to put this on some food tonight, right? I'm ready to make some crostini and use my garlic and thyme oil for that, right? Some of you watched my caramelized onion video, I hope, on the crostini. This would have been great to brush on. I'm going to cap the oils here, and I have my first 2 flavors captured in my bottle, and I have some additional oil left over. I know one of my sons is going to want to make something later on as well with this oil. We'll reheat it and put it into the jar.
So we have a question from Mary. She asked, what kind of fruits can you use for this oil?
Excellent question, and that was one of the things I wanted to highlight. We want to stay away from soft flesh fruits, right? We don't want to use strawberries. We don't want to use berries. There's a place for those, and that would be in a vinegar, right? We can make a raspberry vinegar or a strawberry vinegar. The reason we don't want to use those vegetables, they have a high water content, right? And they're not going to really let out flavor, right? You want ingredients that have an oil content, garlic, herbs, the oil that we get from the time we rub the leaves, that oil extracts. The citrus is excellent for that. So you want to stay more with those things. Spices as well have an oil content. If I were doing a spiced oil, I would want to toast the spices slightly. For example, I want to do a star anise maybe with some Szechuan peppercorn or something like that, or some chilies. I would toast them very lightly, cool them, crush them, put them in the jar, and then pour the oil over the top. You'll extract the flavor from those. So dried spices, low moisture content herbs, and citrus rinds, garlic. Ginger we can use. Again, ginger has a higher moisture content than garlic. We want to be careful. We could dry it slightly, just slice it thinly, put it on a sheet pan, put it in an oven that's not on, leave it overnight, let it dry out a little bit and use that. But you want to stay away from moisture. If you have high moisture content items, what you'll see is at the bottom of the bottle, you'll see a bit of moisture there, and it's not a good thing, because in that moisture things can rot. Okay? So these are now are shelf stable, right? And they're ready to display, right? Again, you have it in barbecue, you're grilling up some bread, you have some condiments you want to put on, bring that oil out, pour it on, drizzle it over top of some grilled fish or some grilled chicken. They're a great flavor. Okay? So that's our flavored oil.
We got a few questions.
Yeah.
Dominic Zara, one of our viewers, he
Dominic.
asked, what kind of dishes would you use the citrus oil on?
I think it's perfect for fish, right, Dom? I think it works well with chicken. I think you can go with vegetables on this, right? I would put that on some asparagus. I would grill the asparagus, right? Not put the oil on the asparagus, I use it after the fact, right? Grill the asparagus, take it off, and then drizzle it with that citrus oil. You bring those flavors of lemon and orange. It's wonderful. Any kind of vegetable would work well with that. You know?
Sarah asked, for the thyme oil, does the thyme have to be really fresh, or?
Yeah, you want your ingredients to be fresh, because again, we're in the visual domain. Look how green and bright that is, right? And also with the thyme, why I love it, I mean, you know, it's almost like an aquarium, right? You can see beautiful movement in there of the herbs in the bottle. I think there's a visual impact as well of that, so, okay. My son, you can feel the warmth, right?
Yes.
Of the bottles, okay. Very important to warm the oil, again, because that's gonna be the extraction point. Other questions about the flavored oils?
Yes. Giovanni Gonzalez asks, does the thyme, garlic, or citrus rinds have any more potential use once the oil is used up?
No, once they're used, you know, the flavors have been extracted. At that point, it's like when you make a stock and you cook the chicken bones and vegetables in the stock and you strain it, we discard the bones and the vegetables because the flavor has been taken out of those elements. Right? Yeah? Good.
And let's see. What's the seal like on those bottles and the shelf stability from Louis Rivera?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let me have one of those bottles back, if I could. So on these oils, if I'm using them for home use, once I seal the bottle, the cap, I keep the air out because everything is kept below the oil. There's no spoilers. There's no chance of anything to go wrong. But for a commercial purpose, and you'll see me do this with the spice tins, and you see this also on the packages here. Louis uses a shrink wrap element here to seal the package, right? Even though the cap already seals the bottle, the shrink wrap makes it look more commercial, right? So they have shrink wrap sleeves for these bottles you can slide over. We simply use a hairdryer and it shrinks that. And you'll see I'll do one of those. I'll do one of those for you when we do the spice tin. So you could seal that up again, but it's not really required. This is shelf stable at room temperature, right? Good question.
Wesley Cervantes, he asked, are the oils just for finishing a dish?
Yes, that's a good question. When you have flavor in oil, and this is also true if you're using a flavored oil, like a sesame oil or an extra virgin olive oil, which is cold pressed and has that wonderful green flavor. You don't want to heat those, because once you heat those, you destroy that flavor, right? That flavor goes away, it dissipates. So the same thing would be true here. You want to use this as a finishing touch rather than, you know, as a brush or as a drizzle. And also, if you use it as a finishing touch, you get the flavor, and because it's an oil, you get the shine on the food, which is really nice, right? So that's how I would use those. Good questions.
Yeah. And Patricia Williams, can it be used on lobster tails?
Patricia, I think either one of these would be excellent on lobster tails. I think the citrus might be a better profile. I don't mind the garlic flavor with the lobster, but sometimes it could be overpowering. Lobster's sweet. You want to keep the integrity of that meat, so I would maybe go with the citrus there. Again, and we're not only scratching the surface in terms of combinations. We could do multiple herbs in here. I could see an herb de Provence flavored oil with rosemary, thyme, marjoram, lavender. I mean, really the potential's there. And what's interesting, if you can find it, we grow a lot of lavender on our property because it's a beautiful plant to grow. It has purple flowers. You actually put the flowers in the jar, and you get that visual, and you get the flavor because the flowers taste like the lavender. So some interesting things that you can do for sure.
Something that me and you spoke about a few days ago about low effort, high impact. Do you think this is something?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question, Jake. My wife and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary on Tuesday. Normally we'd go out and we'd have a wonderful dinner, but my son Jake and my son Frankie put together a remarkable dinner for us. And at the end of the dinner, we were kind of sitting and chatting, and we were talking about, you know, philosophies and menu planning and things. And I've always stressed this, and it's really integral to my style. I want to do the least effort, right, and get the most impact. right? Low effort, high impact is the way to go. My colleague, Chef Pellizzari, and I, we always talk about this in competition dishes. We want to get the most bang for the buck with the least amount of effort, right? Because at the end of the day, time is money, right? And you want to wow the guest, but you don't want to spend all day trying to do it, right? The worst combination is when you put a lot of effort into something and it makes a low impact, right? That's kind of very, it's very demoralizing. And I spent all this time making this thing, and what is it, right? These are examples of low effort, high impact, right? This took less than a minute to put together. It took less than a minute or two to heat the oil, and immediately these are going to make major impacts on the dishes, right? And it's a go-to item. Say, well, what am I going to put on this chicken, this grilled chicken? I got to, oh, okay, I got something, right? Okay, so these are the kinds of things that we want to think about. Again, one addition of an ingredient to a dish, and I get all this flavor, and that's prevailing also in our spice discussion in a little bit as well. So I'm going to start on some barbecue sauce for you. And I want to give you the ratio that I use to establish a barbecue sauce, okay? It's a 3-2-1 ratio, 3-2-1, okay? I'm using 3 parts of fruit puree, okay? I'm using 2 parts of sugar. I'm using 1 part of vinegar, okay? Within those 3 categories, so the fruit puree, the sugar, and the vinegar, I have options, right? Okay, so I want you to think about what's the most popular fruit used in barbecue sauces. I'll give you guys a chance to answer that question while I take a sip of my coffee.
And we have a lot of questions coming in, actually. I'll ask another one. Anthony asked, what is your go-to flavored oil, or does it depend on the meal?
Yeah, man, it depends. I like the citrus oil. I think it has a lot of possibilities, especially on vegetables. The burst of orange and lemon on any kind of vegetable is going to really enhance. So I would say that's one of the strong ones. One I haven't made here is that spiced oil, right? I like that as well. When you have the crushed Szechuan peppercorns and star anise and stuff like that. They're not quite as stark visual as these because it's ground up, it's crushed up, pods of vegetables, of spices rather. So I went with these for the visual aspect, but from a flavor perspective, I like the spice blend oils as well. You can also try with the cinnamon and the clove and stuff like that. Could add, on a grilled piece of meat, it adds a dimension of flavor. So again, I want you guys to experiment and try, and then hit us up and let us know what you did and what worked out.
And Johnny B, can you make these oils during a competition or use on a dish? I know when I did my dish for Delhi, I actually brought in prepared garlic oil, and I finished off some green beans with it.
Yeah, that's
really good.
Good question. In a competition setting, we can bring in flavored oils. We don't have to make those in the window. It's like bringing in a vinegar or an olive oil or a walnut oil or a sesame oil would be in the same category. But again, makes a big impact. And I've used these in the past with different dishes. We've used the chili oil or garlic oil, things like that. So, did we get an answer on the fruit?
Yeah, Dominic, peaches.
Ah, okay. That's the most common, Dominic.
I don't know, Dom.
Well, let me give you the fruit that I'm using today. It's called tomato.
Oh.
Okay?
Got him.
But Dominic, you're onto something, right? Because I mentioned to you there was some room for interpretation, right? There are lots of fruits that we can use, right? I'm thinking I have this mango here, and this mango is really ripe and actually maybe a little overripe. This would make a perfect fruit for barbecue sauce. I can also mix the fruits, right? So for example, if I'm making a barbecue sauce, a standard traditional, I would use tomato, but maybe I want to have the mango. So now of that 3 parts of fruit puree, right? Instead of using 3 parts of tomato, I'm going to use 1 part tomato and 2 parts of mango, pulp, right? Or I'm going to use pineapple, or I'm going to use peaches, right? So we have a lot of room for interpretation, but for the classic barbecue sauce, I'm going to use tomato, and I'm using tomato puree here, okay?
Dom also said cherries. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, again, it's something you want to experiment with. I tend to like softer flesh fruits in the barbecue sauce. They puree better, and they carry better flavor, okay? But here again, it's 3 parts of fruit puree, whichever way you want to go. Okay, I happen to be going with tomato for this one.
Typically, did you say stone fruits work better?
Stone fruits are excellent, even though cherries are a version of a stone fruit. But yeah, so I think peaches, plums for sure. And actually, hoisin is a plum-based sauce, and some people use that as a barbecue-style sauce as well. But those actually work real well. But I would still have some percentage of tomato in that mixture to carry it. I don't know that I would make it with straight fruit other than, having some tomato. Maybe if I were doing the mango, I would use 2 parts mango, 1 part tomato. But you want to have that tomato in there. So that's the first 3 parts of fruit puree. And I didn't mean to fool you on the fact that we're using tomato, but tomatoes are a fruit. So we understand that, botanically speaking, even though we consider it a vegetable. 2 parts sugar. In this case, I'm using brown sugar. I could use different types of sugar here. I could use white sugar. I could use dark brown sugar if I wanted more molasses base and color in my sauce. Could also use white cane sugar. I could use muscovado sugar, very dense, the same sugar we used in our dessert last week. Okay? So 2 parts sugar, 1 part vinegar, and here I'm using straight white vinegar. Okay, you can also mix the vinegars up here. If you want to use some apple cider vinegar, that's also working real well. However, for me, I just like that the straight white vinegar gives me the acidity that I'm looking for. Okay?
This one's 5% acidity, remember?
Yes, yeah, and we'll talk about vinegar acidity. So when we talk about pickling. This is a straight white vinegar, and now we have some options, right? We have our 3-to-1 ratio here. What am I putting in for flavor? Well, the first thing I'm going to put in for flavor, for me, is a little bit of garlic powder, okay? And salt. Again, we're making a very basic barbecue sauce here. And black pepper, okay? As a basis, right? I decided that I want to have some smoky flavor in this barbecue sauce. So how do I get that smoky flavor? I mean, I want to put it on food. Maybe the food isn't smoked, and I want to bring some smoke into it. So I have to make some decisions, right? What I want to do. So there are some things that we can do.
Well, Wesley asked, can you use any type of fruit for the sauce?
Yes, I would suggest, depending upon the fruit, start with, every 3 parts fruit puree. I would start with 1 part tomato and then add to that and then see how it goes from there. But again, soft flesh fruits tend to be better. Those would be your orchard fruits, your stone fruits, plums, peaches, nectarines, apricots would be perfect here. Melon's not so good. Those are soft fleshed. Mango, I think, are excellent for this. Passion fruits would be excellent for this as well. You might want to reserve the seeds and put the seeds back in so you have that textural element. A lot of different options here of what you can do. I might stay away from apples. I'd stay away from pears. Those are the orchard fruits. I misspoke before. We want the stone fruits, right? The pulpy fruits like the mangoes. Pineapple would also work in this as well. And again, in some balance with the tomato. I would not exclude the tomato entirely, okay? You get a weird color. You want to have that red color. So smoke. So we get the liquid smoke, right? I'm using hickory smoke for this today, but I also have some mesquite smoke, right? This is an extract. If you're using vanilla extract or some other extract in the bake shop, almond extract, well, here we're using a smoke extract, right? And this is actually very good and will give a smoky flavor, right, without putting too much in. I'm going to go ahead and put in a tablespoon, right? So for following here, I use 3 cups of tomato puree, 2 cups of brown sugar, 1 cup of white vinegar, and then I put in a teaspoon each of garlic powder, salt, and pepper, right? And a tablespoon of the liquid smoke, right? So there I go. I'm going to cook this stuff. Now, a couple of things to think about. I'm cooking this, but if I'm making this in batches and I'm going to duplicate this recipe, I can't guess, right? I can't guess. I have to know how much I'm cooking it. So what I'm doing is I'm making a visual reference in my pot here. My pot right now of liquid is right here, right? If I'm making the sauce and I said reduce it by half, you'd say, okay, I have this much in the pot, I'm going to reduce by half, so I'm going to stop it at this much. It's very critical that you know exactly where you want to stop here. So what I would do is I'd mark this pot with a marker where the line is, and I'd measure half exactly, because this tells me I'm gonna have the same. Each time I make it, it's gonna be exactly the same, whether it's a pot this size, a kettle, I have to reduce it by the same amount so the flavors are the same each time. So every time you buy one of Lewis's father and son barbecue sauce, it tastes the same, right? So, oh, that tastes different. It's this tangy one, but it's not as tangy or tastes different than the last one. Consistency is important, right? So we're gonna coat this, and I'm gonna reduce this not by half, I'm gonna reduce it 25%. So I'm gonna take it down 1/4, okay? So I'm watching this carefully as it comes up, okay?
We got a few questions. Curtis
Yeah.
Brown, I know you added some spices, but he's asking, what are the main spices in the barbecue sauces?
The main spices that we're gonna get in the barbecue sauce are gonna be your onion powder, your garlic powder, right? That's a baseline, it's like an all-purpose, right? From there, it's up to you, right? I could have added some smoked paprika to this, right? I would have gotten some smoke and a little bit of heat. I could add some cayenne to it. I could add, other spices, to this as well. A little bit of cumin, whatever I'm going for. I'm giving you a neutral platform here for which you can add spices and flavors to. In addition to spices, right, I might be inclined to add other things to this. For example, I did my video on caramelized onions, a couple of weeks ago. I have take a cup of caramelized onions, add that, and process that, and now I got a caramelized onion barbecue sauce, right? So there are other things that we can do to get flavor in here. We want to, again, keep it basic for you to use as a platform for different things and to try some different things. But the ingredients here are very simple, right? To begin with. You make it, you taste it. So this would really be good if it had a little more kick to it. How do we get kick? Right? Tabasco, cayenne, etc. But again, measure it, right? So you know how much you're getting.
Dominic Costantino, he asked, what about using honey or maple syrup for the sugar element?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would still keep the baseline of sugar because that is a consistency generating ingredient. The sugar, as this reduces, is going to give us that glossy, shiny feature that we want in the barbecue sauce. So we would want to play a little bit with the acid if we're going to add things like honey or agave or other kinds of flavored, that have a unique flavor. If you wanted honey flavor in this, a honey barbecue sauce, I don't know that I would use honey. I might use honey, a dried honey powder, right, where I get the honey flavor without any moisture. This way I'm using it as a flavoring ingredient, right, instead of using a spice or anything else like that. I would want to put that in there. If I wanted to get citrus flavor in here, I would do the same thing. I would use a powdered citrus in here to get that flavor out, right? So I get the flavor dispersing in the sauce without any particulate, of zest or anything. And again, zest has oil, but also has a water content, slight water content as well. So we want to keep things dry and keep the flavor as true as we can. But I would play with the acidity, and even so, depending on what you put into this, you might taste and say, well, I like that to be a little more tangy, right? Maybe it's more of a South Carolina style barbecue sauce, right? So I want to increase the acidity. The 3-2-1 is a baseline. If we're going to add other sweeteners or other things along those lines, or we want a more tangy product, we can adjust the quantity of acid that we put in, but I would leave the sugar alone because we want to get that nice gloss and that consistency that the sugar gives us.
And then Dominic Zara, using liquid smoke, do you run the risk of too much smoke that would cause the flavors to muddle?
Well, like anything else, and Dominic's heard this many times, you show restraint, right? When cooking, we talk about this in our competition program, when we're practicing a dish, you want to put the same amount in that you know works. You can definitely overdo with any spice, right? You can overdo with any extract, any flavoring. You want to try to keep it as again, to your taste. How much smokiness do you want? For me, in this particular recipe, the 1 tablespoon gives me a good baseline. I will taste it before I finish it, and I'll make some determinations at that point. But I want to reduce it first. I will taste it after the fact, because I want to let all those flavors homogenize. Good questions. Excellent questions. Yeah? Let's go on to pickling. While this is simmering, I'm keeping my eye on that. Okay? We're going to make the classic Italian Giardiniera to show you how to do a pickle, right? A pickled element, okay? The Giardiniera for us is going to start with the traditional vegetables of the giardiniera. But again, I'm giving you a baseline, and you can make alterations to this. The basic vegetables that we use in the giardiniera are cauliflower, carrots, celery, peppers, and sometimes olives. I'm not putting olives in this one, but these are the basic, I would say the basic 4 ingredients that we use in the giardiniera. And how we handle those vegetables really is important, right? Because we're going to do this as what we call a hot-packed pickle. I'll explain what that is. So you want to have some consistency in terms of the size of your vegetables, right? So I'm going with small florets of cauliflower, right? Okay. And I'm trimming off some of the stalk here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going with some slices of the celery, which I've actually peeled, right? Okay. Some bias cuts, okay? The peppers I'm going to handle in strips. I'm using baby bells here, which are nice and sweet and are thin, right? So I don't get a lot of membrane inside. I'm going to go ahead and quarter those. And then we're going to just go ahead and take out the inside seed pocket here, okay? A little bit. You can pull that out or cut it out either way. Works well for me. Okay, and this is our veg prep. And again, this is a salad that a pickle that you would make when these vegetables are coming in season and you see some beautiful stuff on the market. I'm saying, wow, that'd be great in a giardiniera. So let's put that together. And then the last thing are the carrots, right? And the traditional cut for the carrots is, for lack of a better term, a crinkle cut, right? And that's a classic for the giardiniera salad, right? We get that beautiful little crinkle cut, and I keep them thin because as a hot pack pickle, we want these to soften in the hot pickling brine, right? So that we get that texture that we're looking for, right? Talk about some of the things that we do with this. I'm gonna leave these vegetables here, and I'm sure one of my boys is gonna want to make some giardiniera after this demo. We'll put up a couple of jars for ourselves. We want to start with brine, okay? A pickling brine. So I'm using a non-reactive pot, okay? And pickling brines will vary depending upon the pickle, right? And even depending upon the actual recipe, the giardiniera. For example, Chicago-style giardiniera, right, which is where actually giardiniera comes from, the Italian delis that serve the Italian beef sandwiches, is a ratio of 2 parts water, 1 part vinegar. 2 parts water, 1 part vinegar, right? We're using equal parts of water, okay, straight tap water, and straight white wine vinegar, okay? And we're going to bring this up to a boil. Okay, 1/4 of each, equal parts, okay? Because we want this pickle to store over an extended period of time. We want a higher acid content, but we also want the quintessential vinegariness of a giardiniera. A giardiniera has a vinegary taste to it, right? So we want to capture that. Now, whether you use 3 parts water, 1 part vinegar, whatever the case might be, I have 2 quarts of liquid. I'm using 1 tablespoon of salt per quart of liquid. So if I were going to only make half of this recipe, right, 2 cups of vinegar, 2 cups of water, that's 1 quart total. I would use 1 tablespoon of salt. Here's 2, okay, and that goes right in. And use kosher salt for this, okay? You're going to be happy that you did, right? Kosher salt. If you haven't caught my video on things that make you a better chef right out of the gate, switch up your salt. If you're not using kosher, your food's going to taste better immediately. Okay?
We got a few questions if you want to take a quick
I will,
question.
absolutely.
Let's see. Shauna said she has what's called a fructose absorption, and most barbecue sauces have fructose. So how would you make a barbecue sauce that tastes great without having all the fructose in it?
Okay, so there's no fructose in here because we're using tomato and no other fruit, so there's no natural fructose. We're not putting in high fructose corn syrup either. which a lot of people use as a filler or as a sugar component. This is straight brown sugar, so this would actually work well for you. Once we put fruit in here, then there becomes natural fruit sugars in there. So I think we're okay with this particular recipe.
Mary asks, does white sugar or brown sugar change the flavor?
Yes. The white sugar and brown sugar is going to change the flavor in the fact that brown sugar has some degree of molasses in it, right? Some of the natural raw sugar. The darker the sugar, the more molasses flavor. That molasses can be very palatable and very delicious in the barbecue sauce if that's what you're going for. If you want something more neutral, then maybe you don't want to use the brown sugar. This one we're using a light brown sugar, but as I mentioned, we could have replaced that with dark brown or even a muscovado, which is a very dark brown sugar. That would have given a different flavor and it would have given a different color, right? So we would have gotten a much deeper and darker barbecue sauce color here, okay?
Let's see. Jay Tavares asks, if you had a name for your barbecue sauces, what would it be called? Which is funny because...
Yeah, so the barbecue sauces that I did for my wife and our business, the name of our company was Jesse's Blue Sky, named after my son. Those sauces, we simply, it was a peach barbecue sauce or peach ketchup. Ooh, I didn't use that term before, right? Ketchup, yeah. I'll come back to that in a moment because it's the same ratio, but there's a switch in the ingredients for ketchup if I wanted to make homemade ketchup. We just called them what they were, right? So a spicy barbecue sauce, a peach barbecue sauce. Just interesting point. My wife and I used to do farmers markets. And what kind of inspired me to do the barbecue sauce was at the end of the farmers markets, the farmers would take their peaches and go and dump them in a bin. And they're like, okay, what are you guys doing with those? Well, we're going to compost them. So wait a second, time out. They were overripe, right? They were out all day at the market. They weren't purchased, so now they're getting rid of them. I'm like, oh, I'll take them. And what I did was I made a puree out of all those peaches, and I used that in my barbecue sauce. And as a thank you to the farmer partners that we had, I would just give them a case of the barbecue sauce, and they were very happy. But we were getting 50, 60 pounds of peaches at the end of each market, and that made us 80 bottles of barbecue sauce, right? So those are the kinds of, things that you think about. You go to the market, for example, you go down the aisle in the produce market, you see they wrap up the soft mangoes, because nobody wants them, they're soft, right? They're sweet, and they're ripe, and they're perfect for a barbecue sauce, right? I would, cut them up, throw them right in, let them cook down, let them soften. We're going to process this later on. You take advantage of the value of the product, right? Okay. So, barbecue sauce is reducing nicely. My brine is on, equal parts white vinegar and water with my with my salt. So, I took my vegetables last night, I pre-cut them, and then I put some salt on them. And I covered them pretty well on the top with salt, and then I filled them with fresh water, cold water, up until they got covered to the top. And I let them sit overnight. And this is a very important step for two reasons, okay? One, when you're making a giardiniera or even a regular pickle, using a pickle, for cucumbers or a cucumber, you want to purge out some moisture, right? If I don't do this step of salting the vegetable and drawing out moisture from the vegetable, when I add the brine to the vegetable, that moisture is going to come out in the bottle, in the jar. And I don't want that moisture in the jar. I want the vinegar at the right dilution in the jar. So it's very important to do this step. This can be 6 hours is enough. I did it overnight because it happened to be handy, but now we want to drain them. Okay?
Just quickly, quick question. Kaylana asked, how often do you incorporate your barbecue sauces to different dishes?
So the barbecue sauce has, for me, two functions, right? One, it's a condiment. So we take it to the table, we grill up some burgers, we grill up some stuff, some chicken, and you pour it on the top of the chicken and you eat it, all right? That's an end use of it. But when you're grilling that chicken, right, and you give it that turn, and now it's, it's finishing its cooking. In the last 5 or 10 minutes, you take that barbecue sauce and you brush it on the chicken and you let it finish cooking, right? So what happens now is those sugars caramelize on top and you get this beautiful we call it a lacquer, for lack of a better term, right? It's a cooking term, like when you take a piece of furniture and you put this beautiful, finish on it, it's a shiny and glossy, the same thing with the food, right? So this becomes like, that beautiful coating and glaze. So that would be another application for this particular product. You can also use that as an ingredient if you were braising, you're cooking some ribs and you wanted to get some of that nice barbecue flavor in there. When you wrap the ribs up, right, to finish them up in the oven so they steam and tenderize, you put a little bit of barbecue sauce in and get that flavor imbibed in there. So that works out well too.
Speaking about vinegars, does it matter what kind of vinegar you use?
Yeah, so the vinegar can vary. We're using vinegar primarily for acidity here. So we're not really too concerned about the flavor of the vinegar. So the basic white vinegar works really well. If you wanted an apple cider vinegar, the apple cider has a little bit more sweetness to it. But really the most important thing with the vinegar is the acidity, right? We're using a 5% acidity vinegar. You can go as high as 6%. And that's typically where you're going to find them. For both of these dishes, I'm using the same vinegar, 5%. And if I'm making this dish again, I'm going to find that 5%. Does 1% make a difference? Well, I want you to think about drinking 2% milk or whole milk. Can you tell the difference? Yes, immediately. That one extra percentage of fat makes a big difference, right? The butter I talked about last week, 80% butter fat, European 83, can you taste the difference? Hell yeah, right? So you want to be careful with the percentages. If you're going to stay with 5%, you can stay with 5%, and that's what you're going to be using for each of the recipes.
What about for the vinegar for the pickles? Do you think it matters a whole lot?
Yeah, exactly. So the same thing here applies. For the pickling, I'm using straight white vinegar, the same vinegar. And again, I would use apple cider vinegar. You don't really need to. The only time I would alter the vinegar is if I were doing, for example, a Korean style pickle or an Asian style pickle, which I do a lot of. Then I'm going to go with rice vinegar because the rice vinegar has a specific flavor that we're trying to impart into that product. So if it's not a specific ethnic pickle, like a Korean pickle that I would be using for a banh mi sandwich or something, I would certainly just go with the white vinegar. Okay, you want to bring that to a boil, by the way. Okay.
If you were picking jalapenos, would you go about it the same way?
Yeah, same way. The jalapeno, we would still want to salt them. Again, these vegetables have come out of a salting for 6 hours at least, and I went overnight with these, so I purged out a lot of the moisture. You do the same thing with the jalapeno, salt them, right? We do the same thing with dill pickles, we salt them, same process, okay? Now, let's establish our jars for the hot packing, okay? I have 2 jars here, and these are traditional called bowl jars, right? They're wide mouth jars because I want to be able to get my pickles in there. And I'm going to use these. I could use a larger jar, I could use a smaller jar. We have a lot of options. These jars are readily available now. Pretty much in any supermarket has them. Walmart sells them because people do a lot of this stuff at home. And why not? The possibilities are unlimited, right? In each jar, I'm going to put a half teaspoon of pickling spice. And my go-to pickling spice is the McCormick. It's really one of the only name brand spices that I actually use because it has the blend that I'm looking for. It's got the coriander, it's got the fennel, it's got the crushed red pepper, it's got the dill seed. It's got everything I need in one addition. So I put that right in my jar. And I want to make one of these I'm going to make a little spicy because I think my cousin Larry might be watching and I know he likes the spicy giardiniera. So we're going to take a little bit here, an eighth of a teaspoon, right? We don't want it too spicy, of the chili pepper, and that's going to go in, right? Okay?
Not too spicy.
Not too spicy. And then we want to go in here, I might have some of this garlic left over. I want to go in with a couple of pieces of the garlic here, okay? I'm going to put a fat clove in each one, okay?
Colin asks if you can use something like lemon instead of vinegar. Anything with like that same acidic level?
Yeah, you could use lemon rind, perhaps as a flavoring in a pickle, but you want to stick with straight vinegar. You don't want to use lemon juice in place of. It's a different type of vinegar. It's not acetic acid. It is citric acid. You want to know your acids, right? So you definitely want to stick with your your regular vinegar for this one. Okay? So, let's move these out of the way for a moment. And let's see how we're going to build this. Okay? Taking my veg here. All right? And it wouldn't be an Italian Giardiniera without some pepperoncini, right? So I'm going to put 4 pepperoncini in each jar. We're going to fill the jars with our vegetables here, making sure we get a good balance. Okay? I cut 2 quarts of vegetables, and in those 2 quarts of vegetables, I had 1 quart of cauliflower and then 1 quart of the mixed celery and other stuff, right? So we're putting those right in. Again, I'm trying to create something visual and stunning here, and I'm pushing the vegetables in. We want to get as much into the jar as we can. Don't forget about those pepperoncini, very important. Okay? Here. Okay? In. And hopefully this should be enough for the 2 jars. It will be. There might be a little left over, but I want to make sure, again, you're pushing these guys down and in. Okay? Now, the finished giardiniera can be eaten just as it is. You put some in a plate, you drizzle with some olive oil, right? And you put it, you have it as a little bit of a condiment salad. But really, this is unbelievable on a sandwich. Imagine an Italian hero, right? Salami, gabagool, you know what I mean, right? All that stuff. And you put this on. This is classic on the muffaletta sandwich that we see in New Orleans, the famous sandwich, right? Okay. So this was 2 quarts of vegetables cut, fitting into 2 quart jars. It's perfect. Okay. All right. And I have just enough room for another pepperoncini. Okay. All right. Excellent.
You really want to fill it up because it collapses.
Absolutely want to pack it, right? You can see the stunning visual that we're getting, right, on this as well. So, my vinegar brine is hot, and it must be. So we're going to cut the fire on that. Okay, I'm going to transfer it to a plastic container here so I can pour it more easily into the jars. Okay, let's watch how difficult this is now, right, to make this homemade giardiniera. Oh, okay. I see what's happening. Right up to the top. Okay? Here again. The brine can be saved and then reheated, right? But don't reduce it. Be careful when you reheat it. Just bring it up to the boil. Because if you let it cook too long, right, it's going to reduce the salt content, the water's going to evaporate, okay? So we want to make sure that we're right at the top here. These vegetables are going to settle, okay? We're going to save the rest of our brine, okay? I use just about 3 cups, maybe a little bit less. Let's see, did I use a full quart? I don't think so. Yeah, not quite. Yeah, about 3 cups, okay, if you're keeping score. So we're going to save that brine for another purpose here. Okay, that's ready to go. So I used 3 cups to fill those 2 jars. Now, let's talk about the anatomy of the bowl jar, okay? This part of the jar is the cap, right? There's a hole in it, right? Because this part of the jar is the most important, right? Okay, it's got the gasket seal. So this part of the jar, we're going to go over the top. Okay, this cap is going to hold this down. Okay, we're going to tighten it up, and you listen, this is, okay, there's movement here, okay, on the top. When this is done properly, this jar will seal completely, and that top will be tightly packed, tightly affixed to the jar, right? Right now, it moves, right? You can feel, you can press it, you can hear that sound that it's making, okay? And we're almost done here, but we have to pressure vacuum them. So I'm gonna show you how we do that. We'll do that with the barbecue sauce together. Okay?
You got time for a quick question?
I always do.
Break? There's a few questions here.
Absolutely.
So, Wesley asked a little while ago, can you pickle anything like fruits too? And if so, do you do it the same way, the same technique as you would use for a vegetable?
Yes, so it's a good question, Wesley. So, next time you get a watermelon, right, no one eats the white of the watermelon, right? It's like, wow, you eat the red, no one, the white's hard, right? Take the white, the rind, right, peel the skin off, and use that for a pickle, and you'll taste the most delicious pickle. And you do it the same way that we're doing it here. You'll taste the most delicious pickle that you want to taste. Now, we can do some different flavor profiles, right? So for example, this is a standard hot packed pickle. We would do this, we could use cucumbers, baby gherkins, little tiny cucumbers, whatever. But there are different formulations like bread and butter pickles, which have a sweetness to them, where you actually cook you cook the vegetable in that brine that we just made, take it out, and then put another brine over the top, which has sugar and maybe some turmeric and some different flavorings in there, mustard seeds, whatever. Put that over and then seal them up in the jar. So you get a different formulation of pickle. But for a standard recipe for a pickle, a vinegar pickle, this is the way to go. Again, there are a lot of options in what you can do. So definitely fruits like watermelon rinds and such like that work really well. Again, softer fruits don't pickle so good because they break down in the vinegar solution. So those are better served for making flavored vinegars, which we didn't do today. But same principle that we use for the oils, we would use for vinegars. You take a vinegar, in this case a good quality vinegar, an apple cider vinegar. You throw in some raspberries and you let it sit, and then that vinegar takes on the flavor of the raspberries. Okay.
Let's see. Mary asked. Let's go with Shauna first. Shauna asked, can you use something like a liqueur, or does it have to be vinegar? I think for the pickles.
Yeah, no alcohol in the pickle. In general, you don't want to use alcohol. The vinegar and the sugars and such will react within the jar here, and you'll get that strong acidity. So that would mask any kind of alcohol that you would put in there. But definitely some different flavor profiles, right? We're using garlic and pickling spices here as a simple thing. But again, you could use other flavorings in there. But I would stay away from alcohols and flavors like that. If you wanted, for example, using Grand Marnier for the orange flavor, just put some orange zest in there. Okay?
Does the oil you make from Mary, she asks, does it have to be refrigerated?
No, that's a good question. A good guideline is when you go to the supermarket and you buy oil and pickles and things like that, they're shelf stable, right? You don't buy them in the refrigerator section. However, once you open a jar of pickles or you open a barbecue sauce, then you need to refrigerate it because now you have a temperature, a potential fermentation issue. But these are shelf stable. Once they're packed, you can put them in the pantry, in the garage, in the cabinet, and then when you're ready to eat them, you take them out, you pop open the seal, and you go ahead and eat them, but then put them back in the fridge. Okay, once they're open.
Once you pop the seal.
The same thing will be true with your sauces here, barbecue sauce and such. Okay, so let's talk about sauces here and options, because my barbecue sauce is down now by about 20%, so I got 5% more to go. I'm keeping an eye on the visual here. Like I purchased these jars, the ball jars here, we can get those, or the jars we use for the oil. You can also get your barbecue sauce type jars, right? And they come in all shapes and sizes. As you can see, Lewis is using one of these type jars, right? I've seen them done. I think he originally did one in this kind of jar. They come in this more of a flask style jar, right? Okay. But either way, you want to boil the jars to sanitize them first. I boiled these jars as well before the broadcast in just a simple pot of water. Okay. And now we're getting ready to fill them. Okay. So I'm at 25%. Be a good time for me to taste my sauce here, see where I'm at. And then I'll show you what the visual looks like here. You know what? I always marvel at this whole idea of simplicity. There's really hardly anything in this sauce, right? There's sugar, tomato, vinegar. I put a couple of basic spices in. It tastes really good, right? The one criticism I have, if I'm going for smoky, I get some of it, a little bit, but I'm tasting it hot, and I may not be eating this sauce hot. And without going into the science of dynamics of taste, when you taste something hot and you taste something cold, there's something called flavor muting, right? If it tastes really good hot, when you make it cold and you taste it again, so it tasted so much better before. Well, yeah, because you're tasting it differently when it's hot than when it's cold. So if my intention is to have this be served room temperature or cool, these flavors are going to mute, and I'm not going to get the smokiness. So I'm going to go ahead and add another full tablespoon of my hickory, and that's going to give me my smoky barbecue sauce. And since we're making this together today, we're going to call this our live stream smoky barbecue sauce, right? If we want to brand it. So that's 1 more tablespoon of the hickory. The reduction is good. Okay. I'm going to take it off the fire, and we're going to check our consistency. Okay. This is nice and rich and thick, and it's hot, right? So as this cools, it's going to get even thicker. Again, that's another dynamic of food science. When things are hot, they're liquid. When they get cold, they start to gel up or set up a little bit, right? So let's take a plate here, and let's just kind of give you a visual of where this product is on the plate here, so you can see the consistency of this. Okay. So there's a couple things I'm looking for here. One, I want this to hold the plate, right? The other way I could test this is in the back of my spoon. If I just draw my finger across the spoon, I see that that line of the spoon maintains itself. It's not dripping and closing up. That line is solid, right? That's the way we test sauces out. I think this is going to be really good. If I want to really give it a good test, I might pop this in the fridge for a bit and see what the finished cool consistency is, but I'm very comfortable where this is right now. I'm also very comfortable with the taste. I'm going to taste one more time with that additional smoke I put in, right? Since we're branding this together, our Instagram smoky barbecue sauce, our live stream. Spectacular and simple, right? Simple. A great basis for lots of interpretations. I could see caramelized onion in here. I could see some mango in here. It's got a good acidity. I'm tasting this on ribs. I'm tasting this on chicken. I'm tasting this on grilled eggplant steaks, right? Well, what's that? Well, it's a thick slice of eggplant you grill, right? And then you put some barbecue sauce on it. Delicious, right? Why not? Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and fill our containers. Now, a couple of things to consider. I'm using a commercial tomato puree. I haven't put any fruit purees in here. But on occasion, I might put some fruit purees in. And when I add a puree like that, I'm also adding water, right? And I'm also adding the potential for this to, when it goes into my jars over time, to separate, right? Where you get some pulp at the top and some liquid at the bottom. You don't ever want to have a jar of barbecue sauce that you got to shake, right, before you use like a salad dressing, right? That would be a no-go. Okay? To counter that, I make some decisions, right? I have a half a gram here of something called xanthan gum, which I spoke about in another one of our webinars. Xanthan gum is a modifier, right? It will homogenize all these ingredients in here and keep them homogeneous. They would never separate out. It would add a little bit of thickness to it. It would not change the sheen or the color or the visual appearance. It would simply add some thickness and add some binding to this. It is a vegetable-based product, and it works really well. It's used exclusively in marketed foods, right? Salad dressings. If you look at the labels of all these things, you'll see xanthan gum is one of the ingredients on a lot of these recipes. We're not going to use it here again because I feel like we're stable with everything that we have here. So let's go ahead and fill one of our jars, and we'll talk about that process.
What about a cornstarch slurry for thickening?
Yeah, so the cornstarch slurry is going to change the sheen of this, right? It's going to change the visual appearance of this. And really, I have to boil the cornstarch in order to get it to thicken. I may not want to do that. I may want to cool this down completely, see where it's at in terms of its consistency, and then thicken it. And I can do that with xanthan gum. I cannot do that with cornstarch. I got to boil it, right? So if I want to know what the finished consistency is, the shelf-stable consistency, I cool this down, and then I process it with a little xanthan to get my consistency exactly where I want it, fine-tune it in, and I'm done. Half a gram to a quart should do that, but again, for me, don't need that. Did you get a visual on the
No.
sheen here? Let them see the shine on that sauce. Okay, you can see the little specks of pepper in there, but it's relatively smooth. Okay? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and fill our jars here. Okay? And this is what we call, like we did with the pickles, we call this hot packing, right? We're hot packing the jars with the sauce, and it's important, right? Want to get right up to the line I'm looking for right there. Okay, I have a little bit left here, not quite for another jar, but we'll make good use of that later on when we do some cooking outside.
Yeah, barbecue this weekend.
We got a barbecue this weekend, exactly. So, now, these look like basic caps, right? However, if you look inside the cap, there's a gasket, right? A seal, and that's important because we want to seal these jars, right? That's what makes them shelf stable. So this cap actually is the wrong cap for that jar. Same one with this cap, it has a gasket. Make sure if you're going to order jars like this and you're thinking about doing something with your own, right? Okay? All right? You get the jars with the gasket sealed, okay? All right. Yeah, you can also reuse these at home, right, if you wanted to make some different products and have them available. Okay, now the last thing on these pieces here. In order to seal these bottles, right, I have to build up pressure inside the jar. And the way you build up pressure is by heating, right? So I'm going to take these jars, I'm going to sit them in a pot of water, covering them up almost to the top. Okay? And I'm going to pressure seal these. I'm going to boil them for about 15 minutes, okay? All right? That's going to bring the pressure up in my bottle. And in the cooling of these jars, when I take them out of the hot water, the pressure is going to escape the jar, and as it escapes the jar, it's going to pull the seal down tight to the jar, to when you unscrew the cap, you got to pry off this cap here, right? So this is a vital step, okay? I'll take some questions before I do the last item on our list here.
Let's take a look. Mary asks, why did you salt the vegetables for the pickle?
Okay, so that's a good question. The reason we salt the vegetable for the pickle, we want to extract moisture from the vegetable. We want to take as much water out of the vegetable as we can. If we don't do that, when we put it into the jar, that water is going to come out, and it's going to actually dilute the acidity and the vinegar content of the pickle, and it could give us a chance for spoilage because we changed the balance of acid in the jar by adding water from the vegetable. So that 6-hour purge is very important. It also changes the texture of the vegetable, breaks down some of the fiber from the vegetable, breaks down the cell structure, and makes the pickles more tender. Okay.
Chef Brilski asks, a few years ago in the fall, he had an amazing BBQ glazed pork loin entree at Monroe Dining Lab. He's asking if it's the same barbecue sauce.
It is a similar barbecue sauce. I think we had a little, I think it was a tropical inspiration, so we had a little mango puree in that, but the formula is the same, chef. I think what we did was we used 2 parts mango, 1 part tomato in the formulation. And we used a little bit of Caribbean spice in that. I'm going to show you a Caribbean spice blend here. So we had a little allspice, a little bit of cayenne, etc. in there. So, yeah. Okay. All right, more questions?
How long do you store those vegetables?
So these will sit on the shelf. Once their jars are sealed, you can sit them on the shelf for a year. Once you open them, they have to go in the refrigerator, and they'll stay in the fridge for you for about a month, right? As long as you keep them nice and cool, right? The problem with these is when you take them out, you're gonna have you're doing some dining outside, you bring them to the table, they sit on the table for an hour or two, and then you put them back in the fridge after they're open. You know, it's like anything else, it's temperature sensitive. You want to try to keep them cool as much as possible. Take out what you need in a bowl, keep the rest in the refrigerator, okay? But it's hard to do that because they look so damn good in the bottle, right? You want to showcase that, right?
You don't want to put your fingers or anything in because then the bacteria.
Right, well, I wasn't wearing gloves for any of these processes because now I'm taking care of that by doing the pressure sealing here, right? So that's going to be 15 minutes boiling. Nothing that I've done to these jars is going to survive that 15 minutes of boiling. Okay. All right. Let's do our last thing, and I'll have more time for questions here as well. The last thing I want to talk about is a spice blend, right? Again, we're talking about making an impact in a dish with just one movement, right? So I'm thinking to myself, you know, I want to have this kind of like Szechuan style flavor. I got to put all these spices together. Or I want to have this Caribbean flavor, this jerk. You got to make a jerk. It's a lot of work. You got to all the spices mixing and everything. But what if you made a big batch of blend? And then when I want that jerk flavor, I go right from the bottle to the pan, and I got the flavor all combined, right? And there's a big market for this stuff, which is important, right? People like this idea of gourmet spice blends. My wife and I had 6 or 7 that we did. The herbs that we used were primarily herbs that we grew and dried ourselves, but this works well with commercial. I'm using all commercial product right now, you know, for this recipe. I'm going to make a Caribbean style spice blend for you, right? And for this particular recipe, we want to be very careful when we're measuring this. If we want to duplicate this, we have to really measure it in the smallest quantities. I don't even recommend, you know, tablespoon measures because a tablespoon measure can vary quite a bit, especially when you're talking about small quantities of stuff, right? So we want to use a gram scale, okay? So I'm using a container for my mixing here. I'm zeroing out my scale, and I'm going to start with 20 grams of dehydrated onion, right? 20 grams of dehydrated onion. These are onion flakes called dry chopped onion, okay? And we're going to break these down a little bit in our mortar and pestle just to mix the spices. So 20 ounces of onion, okay? Dry thyme, let me check a look here, 5 grams of the dry thyme, okay? Again, very careful that I'm getting my measurements correct here.
How many tries did it take for you to get the spice blend really to where you wanted it? Like R&D or anything like that?
Yeah, good question. And the R&D for these blends that we did, we really did, you know, make a base. I had an idea of what the flavors were, what I wanted. The big issues for us with this particular blend was allspice and cinnamon. Do we need more? Do we need less? And then, of course, ultimately, it's heat, right? How much heat do you want to put in? Now, Caribbean spice blends are going to have spice, right? They're going to have heat. So how much cayenne do we want? I think we played with that configuration quite a bit to get down to the percentage that we really liked. Okay? Allspice. Okay? The allspice here is 8 grams. Okay, this is a powdered allspice, not whole berries.
Even though you could use that with a microwave.
You could use a whole spices and grind them. What I find though is we want also to lock in our consistency. So as long as your spices are fresh, as these are very fresh, you don't really have an issue with that, you know, in general, right? I have cinnamon, 2 grams. I want to be careful here. We're not making apple pie, right? We're making a spice blend, right? We want that cinnamon in there. Okay? Cayenne. Okay? 3 grams. And this could be not just cayenne. If you wanted to switch to a dried Scotch bonnet pepper, you're gonna increase the heat a little bit. But that's that. pepper. This one here, we're going to use 8 grams. Oh, that smells so good. I get that cinnamon, that allspice. Wonderful. Okay, salt. Now, salt is, you could say it's not really a spice, right? But it serves 2 purposes here. From a commercial standpoint, it gives me some bulk. Spices are more expensive than salt, right? So I'm adding some salt to kind of extend the mix, but more importantly, I'm adding the salt to keep the mix free-flowing, right? Because sometimes the spices, if you get moist, they're going to clump up. So we're putting in, what do I got here? 8 grams of salt. Just a touch more. Okay. Okay, so onion, thyme, allspice, black pepper, cinnamon, cayenne, and salt. Okay?
What's the, for the cinnamon, what does it contribute to this blend?
Like anything else, it gives you that quintessential flavor that we're looking for with the Jamaican blend, right? The allspice and the cinnamon has an interesting, they have a sweeter spice flavor that blends nicely with the heat from the cayenne, right? So, mortar and pestle, okay? This is just to get a mix on the spices here, okay? Just to blend them a little bit. I could use, if I were making a large batch of this, I would certainly want to use, I would probably go to a commercial spice grinder, right? But for a small blend like this is perfectly fine. To blend my onion primarily, I want to crunch up a little bit, okay? Oh, the perfume coming out of here is amazing, right? This is perfect on chicken, on pork. I put this on fish. You can sprinkle it on vegetables. I mean, you can jerk anything at this point, right? I'm thinking about, grilling up some slabs of cauliflower and putting, putting a little citrus oil on there and then hitting it with some of the spice blend. So, these are cute, right? Perfect vessel for spices. This holds 50 grams, right? Airtight. You can hear the pop in the container when I pull it off. You hear the air suction out, right? So if I were doing this for a commercial preparation, right, and I'm selling these, or I'm giving them out as gifts, or I'm using them at a restaurant, maybe I want to be able to offer them to my guests if they want to create my dishes at home, okay, which I did in my restaurant. So 50 grams. This recipe makes just slightly more than 50 grams. Let's see if I measured it out right. 47. Let's get the rest out. Okay. All right, 49. Okay. All right. We cap that up. And if I were storing this, I could put this in a mason jar, like one of these jars in my cabinet, right? It's airtight. We want to keep the spice blend airtight. Ziploc bag, if you don't have a mason jar, you want to make a batch of this, is fine. Everybody's doing spice blends. You look at these barbecue channels, everybody has Killer Hog spice blend, the Meat Church has a whole line of spice blends, the AP rub, all this kind of stuff. You make this stuff at home, and you can customize it to your flavor profile, right? Now, if I were doing something like this commercially, okay, along with any bottles or jars that we get, right, we get these little sleeves here, these little acetate sleeves, right? You put it over the container like that, you hit it with a hair dryer, it seals the can, now you have a sealed can, and you can sell this commercially, right? You put a label on the bottom, what it is, and you have your Caribbean flavor profile. I've done this, I've done a bio blend, which had a Creole flavor profile. I've done a Szechuan blend, which had an Asian with star anise and Szechuan peppercorns. I've done a Tuscan blend, which had all of my freshly grown marjoram and oregano and things like that, which I use for a blend as well. And I've done that. So, did a bunch of things for you today, right? We showed you our flavored oils. We made a spice blend for you. We gave you a basic barbecue sauce recipe. I did tell you I was going to give you the ketchup formula. I'm going to do that. I'm hot packing my pickles right now. We're going to get this to a boil. We'll set our timer for 15 minutes. We'll boil them for 15 minutes, right? The ratio I gave you for the barbecue sauce was 3-2-1, right? You remember that was 3 parts fruit puree, 2 parts sugar, 1 part vinegar. If I wanted to turn this into a ketchup, I do 2 things. The 3-2-1 ratio, the 2-in-1 switch, right? It becomes 2 parts vinegar, 1 part sugar. So 3 parts fruit puree, 2 parts vinegar, 1 part sugar for a ketchup. In my reduction, I would take it down an additional 25%, so I reduce it by half to give me that thickness, right? And then I got the acidity that that is customary to a ketchup. I could do it with tomato, but again, how about a mango ketchup, right? How about a peach ketchup? How about an apricot ketchup, right? A different kind of fruit profile ketchup, you know? These are wonderful, again, big impact, low effort. Putting the ingredients into a pot, reducing them down, putting them into a jar. It really is simple, right, in terms of the scope of it. There's not a lot of fabrication involved, etc. But again, that's another approach. We didn't do a fruit ketchup for you, but in my formulations for the business that I have with my wife, we did a peach ketchup. I did a mixed stone fruit ketchup with nectarines and things like that. So there are a lot of options in terms of what you can do. We'll take some questions.
Sure. Let's take a look here. So there's a few questions from a little while back. I know you mentioned about pickling jalapenos. You do the same thing. How long can they stay edible? You said.
Yeah. So if they're in a sealed jar, you put them on the shelf. You got up to a year, right? Once you open them up, you want to keep them in the refrigerator. They'll last for you in the refrigerator, a few weeks, as long as you keep the temperature cool.
Leslie had an interesting question. I was interested as well. Can you use chocolate as an ingredient to make a barbecue sauce?
So you can. You might want to use cocoa powder in some formulation, right? That could be very interesting. I would approach that more rather than as a component, more as a seasoning or flavoring than as a bulk, item. You're using the vinegar, salt, and vinegar, sugar, and fruit puree. Maybe you put a percentage of cocoa powder in for flavor. Again, that's a great marketing ploy too, right? If you think about it, it tastes really good, and you have some chocolate in there, and you say it's a chocolate barbecue sauce. I mean, you talk about people shopping for something unique and interesting. Well, it's got to taste good, right, Wesley? It's got to taste really good, and you got to taste the chocolate, right?
Yeah, I know I saw at the store they had coffee flavored. I mean, just as a...
Absolutely, yeah. You put in. So here again, maybe you put in a little bit of powdered espresso powder, right, to get a coffee flavor in there. Again, you're building. I always suggest, if this is a new territory for you, start with the basic recipe, cook through it, and say, wow, what would be interesting, and then try it. But remember, when you do this, if it's something that you want to replicate, you've got to be careful about making sure you note the quantities, right? If you notice, you can see my sheet, I actually have it here. These are the original Spice Blend formulas that we used, right, back in the day. These were the final blends, right, just handwritten out on a piece of paper. All the grams, all the percentages. I have 30% red pepper, 20% mushroom, 15% oregano. This is how I thought about it when I was concepting it. And then I measured the stuff out, and I said, wow, that was really interesting, but it could use a little more oregano, so maybe I changed the percentage of oregano and the amount of oregano. But that's basically, you got to keep good notes, right, if you're creating something. And you never know, you stumble upon something interesting, right? I will tell you that the specialty food market is expansive, and it's gotten more expansive with all the mail order stuff, right, with all the companies that are out there. Where you can, Google barbecue sauce and you get hundreds of different varieties that are available to you, both through individual sellers like Lewis is selling through Father and Son's Kitchen.com, or through Amazon, or through retail outlets, or whatever it might be. there's a big market for specialty foods because people like to eat and they like food that's interesting. You know, and these can be very interesting when you do your own formulations. Another question.
The comparison between kosher salt and table salt, the big difference.
Yeah,
We use kosher salt.
yeah. So there's a big difference. I mean, save your table salt for popcorn, right? That's great on popcorn. But for real cooking, you want a good quality salt, a good sea salt. For finishing, if you're just sprinkling some salt on top of food, you know, make the investment, right? You don't use a lot of this, right? Okay, the flour to sell. But you know, just at the end, you have a beautiful piece of grilled meat or something, or some vegetables, a little sprinkle on top. What a difference! It just has a different flavor, right? Okay, different, you know, presence.
How far does water have to come up? Like how high, I guess?
Yeah, so I am just about, you can't see it here in the camera, but I'm just right under the lid of the bottle. And the reason I'm under the lid of the bottle, I don't want any water going in prior to the seal, right? I don't want water going into the jar before it actually has a chance to seal, okay?
Can any fruit nectar be used?
Any fruit nectar you like, yes.
And Greg asked, when you're making a spice blend, is there usually a core group of spices that you want to start with, or does it depend on what you want to do with the blend?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm thinking to myself, if I say, well, I think we're gonna have to have a Caribbean profile, so I know, I'm thinking about the palette of flavor for that particular profile. So if I'm doing Caribbean, I gotta have allspice, I gotta have some cinnamon, I gotta have some cayenne, or some hot pepper. So definitely thinking along those lines. If I'm doing a European style, I did the Tuscany blend, I'm using rosemary, I'm using marjoram, I'm using oregano. So I think that dictates, the blend dictates what you're doing. I'm doing a Szechuan blend. The whole idea of that comes from Szechuan peppercorns and star anise and those kinds of flavors, right? So I think you think about what flavor you're trying to project and then what's in that flavor profile. If I were doing a Tex-Mex style, I mean, it's cumin, it's paprika, right? You know, so I'm thinking about those things. I did a Bayou blend. I'm thinking, you know, the flavors of Old Bay, right? What's in Old Bay? You know, marjoram, celery seed, you know, paprika, black pepper, you know, those kinds of things.
So actually in the chat, there's a hashtag in the chat. It's hashtag Battle of the Costantinos. They want to see me and Frankie have a knife skills.
Is that right?
And actually, you know, in fairness, I'm going to say, while I was busy here working the camera, he said Jake would not like, quote, Jake would not like to go up against me. The result would be embarrassing for him.
So I'm understanding, so the hashtag, am I in, because I'm a Costantino as well.
I think they included.
Oh, you included?
I think it's the three of us.
Oh, okay.
I think it's cute. You know,
I think it was supposed to be you two, and then
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty good with a knife, so I like my chances.
I think we both finished before he was done peeling. Anyway.
More questions?
Yeah, but before that, they said they wanted you to do a basic knife skills.
Run, yeah. They
as
said they missed the
a
skill.
run for
Surprise.
the next
Sure.
week.
That sounds like a plan. I like that idea.
And
Will do.
let's see.
Any other questions for me?
No, I don't think we have any new
I don't think
questions.
we have
If there's any new questions?
Well, I want to, first I want to thank Frankie and Jake for working with me today. I couldn't do this without them. Thank you all very much for supporting the broadcast and the channel. I hope you get something out of this. The whole idea is for you to try some things at home and expand your flavor vocabulary and your knowledge base. We've got some great things to work with today, and you know, we'll let you know how they tasted next week after the pickles are done. Okay? Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day and have a great Memorial Day weekend. Try some stuff at home. Take care.